The morning broke cold and unforgiving across the Cascade Valley, the kind of cold that settled into your bones and stayed there. Mara Hale stood at the window of the small room she'd shared with her sister for 23 years, watching the mist roll down from the mountain peaks like something alive. Her breath fogged the glass, obscuring the view of pine trees that stretched up toward Rowan Vance's territory, that brutal expanse of wilderness where only the hardest men survived. Behind her, the wedding dress hung on the door like a ghost. White lace, delicate embroidery, fitted waist, all of it made for Lydia. Mara turned away. Her hands were shaking, and she hated that, hated the weakness of it. The dress had been hanging there since yesterday afternoon when Lydia had tried it on, spinning in front of the mirror with that luminous smile that made everyone in the room lean forward, drawn to her like moths to flame. Mara had sat in the corner, pinning the hem, invisible as always. Their mother had fussed over every detail, running her fingers over the fabric, eyes bright with something close to desperation. "This marriage saves us," she'd whispered to Lydia, though Mara heard it too. "The Vance land gives us water rights. Winter passage, trade routes through the high country. Your father's sheep operation survives, and we survive with it." Lydia had just smiled, that careful, beautiful smile that never quite reached her eyes. "I know, Mama." But Mara had seen something else in her sister's face, something restless and sharp. Now the dress hung empty, and Lydia was gone. Mara pressed her forehead against the cold window glass, remembering the sound that had woken her some time past midnight, the soft creak of floorboards, the whisper of fabric, the barely audible click of the door latch. She'd opened her eyes in the darkness to see Lydia's silhouette slip through the doorway, a packed bag over her shoulder. For one long moment, their eyes had met across the dark room. Lydia had pressed a finger to her lips, and Mara had said nothing. She didn't know why. Maybe because she'd spent her whole life saying nothing, learning to make herself small and quiet in the spaces Lydia's brightness left behind. Maybe because some part of her, some terrible, secret part, was glad to see her sister's careful mask finally crack. Or maybe she'd just been too shocked to speak. The knock on the door came hard and insistent. "Mara!" Her father's voice, rough with panic. "Get dressed, now." She opened the door to find Thomas Hale wild-eyed, his face red from the cold or from rage, probably both. Her mother stood behind him, hands twisted in her apron, mouth pressed into a thin line. "Where is she?" her father demanded. Mara looked at him steadily. "Gone." "Gone where?" "I don't know." It wasn't quite a lie. She didn't know where exactly, just away. Somewhere down the mountain, toward the valley towns where Lydia had always looked with hungry eyes, talking about theaters and dance halls and men who wore suits instead of buckskin. Thomas Hale grabbed Mara's shoulders, his grip painful. "Did she say anything? Leave a note?" "No." Her mother made a small, broken sound. "The wedding! Oh God, Thomas, the wedding! I know!" He released Mara with a shove that sent her stumbling back against the bed. "Get dressed. Put on something decent." "We're going to the church." "Why?" Mara asked, though she already knew the answer, could feel it settling over her like a shroud. Her father's laugh was bitter, desperate. "Because someone has to explain this disaster to Rowan Vance, and it sure as hell won't be your sister." The Chapel of the Crossing sat at the edge of where civilization gave way to true wilderness, a rough-hewn building of mountain pine and river stone that had stood for 60 years. Inside, it smelled like wood smoke, and old varnish, and the fierce sweat of too many people packed into too small a space. Mara stood in the tiny back room, her mother's hands rough and frantic as they tried to make her presentable. A simple dress. Not the wedding gown. Nothing like the wedding gown. Dark gray wool that did nothing for her pale skin and brown hair. Her mother had tried to pin her hair up, but half of it had already escaped, falling around her face in limp strands. "You look fine," her mother lied, not meeting her eyes. Through the thin walls, Mara could hear the murmur of the gathered families. The Hales and their allies on one side, the mountain people on the other. Rowan's people. Though calling them that felt strange. Rowan Vance didn't have people. He had land. He had survival. He had a reputation that made men speak in quiet voices about the winter he'd lived alone in a snowbound cabin for 4 months, coming out in spring lean as a wolf and twice as dangerous. "I can't do this," Mara whispered. Her mother's hand stilled. For a moment, something almost like sympathy crossed her face. Then it hardened. "You can. You will." Mama, your sister has ruined us. The words came out flat, final. Your father owes money we don't have. The sheep operation is failing. We need this alliance, Mara. We need the Vance land rights. We need... She stopped, took a breath. We need you to walk out there and face what Lydia was too selfish to face. I'm not Lydia. No. Her mother's voice went soft, almost cruel. You're not. The door opened. Thomas Hale stood there, his face grim. It's time. Mara felt her legs go weak. Papa, please, now. She walked through the door because there was nowhere else to go. The narrow hallway seemed to stretch forever, each step bringing her closer to the main chapel where everyone waited. At the end of the hall, she could see them, rows of people turned in their seats, faces sharp with curiosity and judgment. And at the front, by the altar, a figure in dark wool and leather. Rowan Vance. She'd seen him before, of course. Everyone in the valley knew Rowan Vance, even if most only knew him from a distance. He came down from the mountain twice a year, once before winter to trade furs and preserved meat, once in spring to sell timber. He spoke little, bought less, and returned to his high country cabin as soon as business was done. But she'd never been this close, never had to walk toward him with every eye in the valley watching. The murmur of conversation died as she stepped into the main chapel. The silence that replaced it was worse, heavy and expectant and cruel. Mara forced herself to look up. Rowan stood with his back straight, his hands loose at his sides. He was tall, which she'd known, but up close the sheer solidity of him was startling. Broad shoulders, strong hands scarred from work and weather, dark hair pulled back from a face that showed every one of his 32 years in lines around his eyes and mouth. Not handsome, exactly. Too rough for that, but striking in the way a cliff face is striking, all hard angles and uncompromising strength. His eyes met hers, gray as winter sky, unreadable. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, clearing his throat. He was a valley man, soft around the middle, uncomfortable with the attention. Folks, there's been a situation. Someone laughed. The sound broke the tension like a stone through ice, and suddenly everyone was talking at once. Where's Lydia? I heard she ran off. With that tinker's son from Silver Creek? Thomas Hale. What kind of family do you run? Mara stood frozen in the aisle, feeling the weight of every stare, every whisper. Her father pushed past her, raising his hands for quiet. Please, he said, and his voice cracked on the word. Please, just let me explain. Explain what? The voice came from the mountainside of the chapel, a hard-faced woman named Ruth Carver who worked a trapline north of Rowan's land. That your daughter's made fools of us all? That she couldn't even show the respect to break her word to a man's face? Thomas Hale's face went red. My daughter, Lydia, she's young. She made a mistake. A mistake that breaks the alliance, someone else called out. The water rights, the trade access, all of it's void now. Not necessarily. Thomas Hale's desperation was painful to watch. We can still honor the agreement. The alliance can still stand. How? Ruth Carver demanded. Your bride's run off. There's no marriage. There can be. The words fell into sudden silence. Thomas Hale's hand closed around Mara's arm, pulling her forward. She stumbled, catching herself against the end of a pew. This is my other daughter, her father said, his voice too loud in the quiet chapel. Mara, she's of age, unmarried. The alliance could transfer to her. The agreement could still... The laughter started before he could finish. Not cruel laughter, exactly. More like disbelief. The kind of laughter that comes when something is so absurd you can't help yourself. Mara felt each laugh like a physical blow. You can't be serious, someone said. Rowan Vance and her? Look at her, Thomas. Be reasonable. Her father's grip tightened. She's a good girl, hard-working. She's not Lydia. The voice came from somewhere in the middle of the chapel, matter-of-fact and final. And there it was. The truth everyone knew but rarely spoke aloud. Mara wasn't Lydia. Lydia was beautiful, golden-haired and bright-eyed with a smile that could charm birds from trees. Lydia could sing, could dance, could walk into a room and make every head turn. Mara was plain, quiet. The sister people forgot was in the room until someone needed something sewn or cleaned or organized. 23 years old with brown hair that wouldn't hold a curl and a face that was too long, too thin, too forgettable. The mountain people weren't laughing. They sat silent and still, watching Rowan. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, just stood there by the altar, his face carved from stone. Sheriff Dalton cleared his throat. Mr. Vance, this is highly irregular. You have every right to refuse. The contract was made with... I know who the contract was made with. Rowan's voice was rough from disuse, but it carried through the chapel like a wind through pines. I know what was promised. He looked at Mara then, really looked at her. She forced herself not to look away, though everything in her wanted to. Forced herself to meet those gray eyes and let him see exactly what he'd be getting. No illusions, no pretense, just her, plain Mara, forgotten Mara. The replacement bride no one wanted. The silence stretched so long she could hear the wind outside rattling the windows. Then Rowan spoke. I'll take her. The chapel erupted. You can't? Rowan, think about what she's not worthy of... Enough. Rowan's voice didn't rise, but something in it cut through the noise like an axe through wood. I said I'll take her. That's the end of it. Ruth Carver stood, her face shocked. Rowan, you don't owe these Valley people anything, not after what their daughter just did to you. I know what I owe. He looked at the sheriff. Draw up the papers. Same terms as before. Water rights, land access, winter passage. Her family gets what they need. I get what was promised. A wife, Sheriff Dalton said carefully. A wife, Rowan agreed. He didn't look at Mara again, didn't acknowledge her standing there in the aisle in her plain gray dress, her father's hand still gripping her arm like she might run too. The mountain people were exchanging glances, clearly unhappy but unwilling to challenge Rowan's decision. The Valley people looked relieved and ashamed in equal measure. Mara just felt numb. Sheriff Dalton pulled out papers, his hands shaking slightly as he unfolded them. There will need to be witnesses, and, the vows. Should we proceed with the ceremony now, or now? Rowan's voice was flat. No point waiting. But the bride she's not prepared, someone protested. She's here. That's prepared enough. Mara's mother appeared at her side, pressing something into her hand, a small bunch of dried wildflowers left over from Lydia's preparations. The stems were rough against her palm. Walk, her mother whispered. For God's sake, Mara, walk. So she walked, down the aisle between two families who'd rather she didn't exist, toward a man who'd agreed to marry her only because she was better than nothing. Her legs felt distant, disconnected. The flowers trembled in her hand. When she reached the altar, Rowan didn't turn to face her, didn't take her hand, just stood there, staring straight ahead at Sheriff Dalton like this was a business transaction, which, Mara supposed, it was. Dearly beloved, Sheriff Dalton began, his voice uncertain. He stumbled through the traditional words, rushing through phrases about love and devotion that sounded hollow in this rough mountain chapel with its restless, unhappy congregation. Mara barely heard him. She was too aware of Rowan beside her, the heat of him, the solid reality of him, the absolute strangeness of standing next to a man she'd never spoken to and promising to spend her life with him. Do you, Rowan James Vance, take this woman? Sheriff Dalton glanced at the papers. Mara Elizabeth Hale, to be your lawfully wedded wife? A pause, long enough that Mara's heart stopped. I do. And do you, Mara Elizabeth Hale, take this man? I do. The words came out steadier than she'd expected, maybe because none of this felt real, maybe because she'd already accepted that her life had stopped being her own the moment Lydia slipped out that door. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you man and wife. Sheriff Dalton closed the book with a snap. You may kiss the bride. Rowan turned to her for the first time. Up close, his eyes were even stranger. Not quite gray, she realized, more like the color of storm clouds with something darker underneath. He looked at her face, and she saw him cataloging what he'd gotten. The sharp nose, the thin mouth, the unremarkable features that would never inspire poetry or songs. Then he leaned down and she tensed, expecting... He pressed his lips to her forehead, briefly, formally, like a man sealing a contract. It's done, he said, and turned away. The chapel broke into murmured conversation again. People standing, gathering belongings, already starting to leave. The ceremony was over. The alliance was secured. There was nothing left to see. Mara stood at the altar, the dried flowers still clutched in her hand, and tried to understand that she was married now, that the rough mountain man already walking toward the chapel door was her husband, that her life as she'd known it was finished. Her mother embraced her quickly, whispered something Mara didn't hear. Her father shook Rowan's hand, relief and shame warring on his face. A few valley people offered awkward congratulations, already edging toward the door. The mountain people left without a word. Within 15 minutes, the chapel was nearly empty. Rowan stood by the door, talking in low voices with Ruth Carver. The older woman kept glancing at Mara, her expression unreadable. "She's valley soft," Ruth said, not bothering to lower her voice. "She won't last a week up there." "Then she won't," Rowan replied. "Either way, it's not your concern. You're making a mistake." "Wouldn't be the first time." Ruth shook her head, then pulled on her heavy coat. "Good luck, Rowan Vance. You're going to need it." She left, and suddenly Mara and Rowan were alone in the chapel except for Sheriff Dalton gathering his papers at the altar. Rowan turned to her. "You have belongings?" Yes, at my parents' house. Get them. We leave in an hour." "An hour? But I need to... I should say goodbye, and there are things I need to..." "An hour," he repeated. "Storm's coming in tonight. I don't ride in the dark if I can help it, and the trail takes 3 hours in good weather." He pulled on a heavy coat lined with fur, settling it across his shoulders with the ease of long practice. Then he walked out, leaving her standing alone in the empty chapel with a dying bunch of wildflowers and the sharp, sudden knowledge that everything was about to change. Mara's room felt smaller than she remembered. She moved through it mechanically, pulling her few belongings from the drawer she'd shared with Lydia. 2 spare dresses, undergarments, the wool stockings she'd knitted last winter, a comb missing half its teeth, her mother's old recipe book, the pages soft from use. Everything fit in one small traveling bag. She was closing it when she saw the letter on Lydia's pillow. Her hand trembled as she picked it up. The paper was fine quality, too fine for anything they had in this house. The handwriting was Lydia's, but looser than usual, like she'd written it quickly. "Dear Mara, I know you think I'm terrible. Maybe I am. But I couldn't do it. Couldn't marry myself off to some mountain hermit to save Papa's failing business. Couldn't spend my life in that wilderness, getting old and hard like those mountain women, forgetting what music sounds like or what it feels like to dance. I'm going to Silver Creek with James. He has family there, real prospects. We're going to start over somewhere that isn't so desperate and cold. I know you'll be angry. I know Mama and Papa will be devastated. But you've always been the strong one, Mara, the practical one. You'll figure something out. You always do. I'm sorry I didn't say goodbye. L. Mara read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. She didn't know what she felt. Anger, maybe. Betrayal. A strange, bitter relief that Lydia had at least acknowledged that this would hurt. And underneath it all, something that felt almost like envy. Lydia had run, had chosen her own path, her own future, her own life. Mara was just doing what she was told, like always. Her mother was waiting downstairs, wringing her hands. I packed you some food, dried meat, bread, cheese, enough for a few days. Thank you. Mara, Her mother's voice broke. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted. Did you know? Mara asked quietly. About Lydia and James? Her mother looked away. I suspected. Your sister was never good at hiding what she wanted. But you said nothing. What could I say? If I confronted her, she might have run sooner. We needed this marriage to happen, Mara. We needed... She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth. I know I'm asking the impossible, but please try. Try to make this work. For all of us. Mara picked up her bag. I should go. He said an hour. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the sharp scent of coming snow. Rowan was waiting in the yard with 2 horses, a large roan gelding and a smaller chestnut mare. He was checking the saddle straps, his movements efficient and practiced. He glanced up when she approached. You ride? A little. Good enough. He took her bag, secured it to the mare's saddle with quick, competent movements. This is Copper. She's steady. Just keep her behind my horse and she'll follow the trail. He helped her mount, his hands impersonal and strong, then swung onto his own horse with easy grace. Thomas Hale appeared from the house, stumbling slightly. Mara could smell the whiskey from 10 feet away. Vance, he called, take care of her. She's a good girl, hard-working. She'll... I know what I'm getting, Rowan said, cutting him off. He turned the roan toward the mountain trail. Let's go. Mara took one last look at the small house, her mother's tear-streaked face in the window, her father swaying in the yard. Then she urged Copper forward, and they rode away. The trail climbed steep and fast, switching back and forth across the mountain face. Within an hour, the valley had dropped away below them, the houses shrinking to toy-sized buildings scattered among brown fields. Rowan rode ahead in silence, his back straight, never looking back to see if she was keeping up. Mara focused on staying in the saddle. She'd ridden before, but never on terrain this rough. Copper picked her way carefully over loose stones and exposed roots, sometimes coming so close to the edge that Mara could see straight down the mountain face to the creek far below. The wind grew colder as they climbed. She pulled her shawl tighter, but it wasn't enough. She'd dressed for the chapel, not for riding into the high country in late November. Snow began to fall, just a few flakes at first, then more steadily. The trail ahead disappeared into white curtains of snow and mist. "How much farther?" she called. Rowan didn't turn. 2 hours. Maybe more in this. 2 hours. Mara's hands were already numb. They rode on. The trail narrowed, running along a cliff face where the wind hit them full force. Mara hunched over Copper's neck, trying to shield herself. Below she could hear water rushing, a river maybe, though she couldn't see it through the snow. Something crashed in the trees above them. Copper shied, dancing sideways toward the cliff edge. Mara's heart stopped. She pulled on the reins, but Copper was panicking, eyes rolling white. "Easy," Rowan's voice, suddenly beside her. His hand closed over Copper's bridle, steadying her with the same calm he'd shown standing at the altar. "Easy, girl. Nothing up there but a tree branch falling." He looked at Mara, really looked at her, for the first time since they'd left the chapel. "You're freezing." "I'm fine. You're blue." He swung down from his horse, pulled something from his saddlebag, a thick fur blanket. He shook it out, draped it around her shoulders. "Put your arms through here, it'll keep the wind off." The fur was heavy and warm, lined with soft rabbit pelts. It smelled like wood smoke and pine. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded once, remounted, and rode on. But after that he slowed his pace slightly, checked back more often to make sure she was keeping up. Small mercies, Mara thought. She'd take them where she could find them. The snow fell heavier, the trail grew steeper. Mara's world narrowed to Copper's mane, the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her, the endless white of falling snow. She didn't see the cabin until they were almost upon it. It materialized out of the storm like something from a dream, a low building of dark timber and river stone, built into the mountain itself. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. A lean-to stable stood to one side, sheltered from the wind. Rowan dismounted, opened the stable door, and led both horses inside. Mara climbed down stiffly, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. She leaned against Copper's warm side, trying to feel her feet again. "Inside." Rowan nodded toward the cabin door. "I'll see to the horses." Mara trudged through knee-deep snow to the door. It opened easily, swinging inward to reveal. She stopped. The cabin was warm, clean, and clearly prepared for a bride. Furs were laid across the bed, white fox and beaver, beautiful and expensive. Candles sat ready on a rough-hewn table. A fire burned low in the stone hearth. Dried flowers hung from the rafters, filling the air with the scent of summer meadows. On the table, a bottle of wine. 2 wooden cups. All of it chosen for Lydia. All of it waiting for a bride who would never come. Mara stood in the doorway, dripping snow onto the clean floor, and felt the weight of it crush down on her. This wasn't her home. This wasn't her life. She was standing in someone else's future, wearing someone else's wedding, living someone else's mistake. Behind her, she heard Rowan's boots on the porch. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, looking at the prepared cabin, at the furs and candles and flowers, at the evidence of hope and preparation and expectation. His face didn't change, but something in his eyes went cold and distant. He walked past her without a word, grabbed the white fox fur from the bed and threw it into the corner. Then the beaver pelts, the wine bottle, the cups. The dried flowers came down from the rafters in one hard pull, scattering across the floor. Mara pressed herself against the wall, watching him dismantle everything with quick, violent efficiency. When it was done, the cabin looked different, emptier, colder. Rowan stood in the center of it, breathing hard, his hands clenched at his sides. I'll sleep in the stable tonight, he said, his voice flat. Tomorrow I'll build a second bed. You can have that corner. He nodded toward the space by the hearth. Keep the fire going. Don't let it die. Rowan, keep the fire going, he repeated, and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Mara stood alone in the cabin that was supposed to be a home, surrounded by scattered furs and broken flowers, and finally let herself cry. Mara woke to absolute silence, not the comfortable silence of the valley, where you could still hear chickens in the distance, or a neighbor's door closing, or the rumble of a cart on the road. This was different, dense and complete, like the mountain had swallowed every sound that tried to exist. She opened her eyes to gray pre-dawn light filtering through the cabin's single window. The fire had burned down to embers, her breath fogged in the cold air. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it came back. The chapel, the ride, the scattered furs on the floor where she'd eventually fallen asleep, too exhausted to do anything else. She sat up slowly, every muscle protesting. The fur blanket Rowan had given her on the trail was still wrapped around her shoulders. She'd been too cold to take it off. The cabin was small, maybe 20 feet square. One room. Stone hearth on the far wall, the mantel scarred and stained from years of use. A rough table with 2 chairs. Shelves holding supplies. Dried beans, flour sacks, strips of jerky hanging from hooks. The bed where the white furs had been, now just a wooden frame with a thin wool blanket. And in the corner by the door, Rowan's rifle. He'd come back at some point during the night. The gun hadn't been there when she'd cried herself to sleep. Mara stood, wrapping the fur tighter, and went to the window. Snow covered everything, the ground, the trees, the woodpile stacked against the cabin's north wall. At least 2 feet had fallen overnight. The world beyond the clearing was nothing but white and dark pine. She couldn't see the trail they'd ridden up, couldn't see anything that looked like a path back to civilization. The door opened, letting in a blast of freezing air. Rowan stepped through, arms full of firewood. He kicked the door shut behind him, barely glancing at her as he crossed to the hearth. You let the fire die. The words were flat, accusatory. I fell asleep, Mara said. Fire dies up here, you freeze. He dropped the wood with a clatter, knelt by the hearth, and began rebuilding it with quick, practiced movements. That's the first rule, keep the fire going. I didn't know. Now you do. He struck flint to steel, coaxing the embers back to life. Within minutes, flames were licking up around fresh logs. Heat began to push back the cold. Rowan stood, brushing bark from his hands. He looked at her properly for the first time, taking in her rumpled dress, her loose hair, the exhaustion that must have been written all over her face. You should eat, he said. There's bread in the tin on the shelf, dried meat. Help yourself. What about you? Already ate. He pulled on a heavy coat, checking the pockets. I'm going to check the trap lines. There's a storm coming in tonight, bigger than yesterday. I need to make sure everything's secured before it hits. How long will you be gone? Most of the day. He paused at the door. Don't go outside unless you have to. If you do, stay within sight of the cabin. Snow this deep. You can get turned around in 30 seconds and walk right off a cliff. I won't. But he was already gone, the door closing behind him with a solid thunk. Mara stood alone in the warming cabin and tried not to panic. This was her life now. This cabin. This mountain. This man who spoke to her like she was a problem that needed managing. She took a shaky breath, then another. Then she went to find something to eat. The bread was dense and dark, probably made with rye flour. The dried meat was venison, tough and salty. She forced herself to eat both, chewing slowly, trying to settle her stomach. When she was done, she looked around the cabin again, seeing it differently this time. Not as a home, as a problem, because it was a mess. Oh, it was clean enough on the surface. Rowan clearly swept and kept things from getting filthy, but there was no organization. Supplies were scattered across shelves with no logic to their placement, flour next to gun oil next to a coil of rope. The dried meat hung wherever there was space, some of it so high she'd need a ladder to reach it. The bed wasn't even properly made, just a blanket thrown across bare boards. And in the corner where Rowan had hurled the wedding furs, everything lay in a tangled heap, getting dusty and ruined. Mara stood, walked over, and picked up the white fox fur. It was beautiful work, the pelts perfectly matched, stitched together with careful seams. Expensive, the kind of thing you saw in valley trading posts with price tags that made farmers wince. Rowan had thrown it away like it meant nothing, because it didn't mean anything, not anymore. She folded it carefully, then did the same with the beaver pelts. The wine bottle wasn't broken, just rolled into the corner. She set it on the shelf. The wooden cups went beside it. The dried flowers were past saving, so she swept them up and added them to the fire. When she was done, the cabin looked less like a crime scene. She stood in the center of the room, hands on her hips, and made a decision. If she was going to survive this, and she was, because she didn't know how to do anything else, she needed to make this place work. Not for Rowan, for herself. She started with the shelves. It took the better part of the morning, but she reorganized everything. Food supplies on the left, closest to the hearth where they'd stay dry. Tools and equipment on the right, sorted by type. The dried meat she moved to hooks closer to the door, where cold air would help preserve it. She found a box of candles mixed in with ammunition and separated them. Found 3 different partially used sacks of flour and consolidated them into one. By the time she finished, her back ached and her hands were covered in dust. But the cabin made sense. She was sweeping the floor when she noticed the trunk under the bed. It was old, the wood scarred and water-stained. She hesitated, then pulled it out and opened the lid. Inside were more furs, these ones clearly not meant for decoration. Working furs, wolf and coyote, and what might have been bear. Underneath those, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, were papers. Mara lifted them out, unfolded them carefully. Trade records. Or what should have been trade records. She spread them across the table, frowning. Rowan's handwriting was barely legible, and his numbers were worse. He'd tracked sales and purchases, but there was no organization to it. Dates were missing, quantities were approximated, prices fluctuated wildly with no explanation. She found a notation from last spring. Sold furs, got fair price. That was it. No record of how many furs, what type, who he'd sold them to, or what fair price actually meant. Another note. Bought supplies for winter. Enough. No list of what he'd bought. No accounting of whether enough had actually been enough. Mara sat back, pressing her fingers to her temples. She'd helped her father with the sheep operations books for years. Enough to know that this was how a business failed. You couldn't plan for winter if you didn't know what winter cost. Couldn't negotiate fair prices if you didn't know what you'd gotten before. She was still staring at the papers when the door opened. Rowan came in, bringing cold air and the smell of pine. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders. He stopped when he saw the reorganized cabin, his eyes moving across the shelves, the swept floor, the neat stacks of supplies. "What did you do?" His voice was carefully neutral. "I cleaned, organized." Mara stood, suddenly defensive. "I hope that's all right. Everything was scattered, and I thought, the papers." He was looking at the trade records spread across the table. "You went through my things. They were in the trunk. Those are private." He crossed to the table in 3 long strides, gathering up the papers with rough movements. "You had no right. I wasn't trying to pry. I was just looking for what?" He turned on her, and for the first time since the chapel, real emotion showed on his face. Anger. Looking for proof that the mountain man can't count, that he's too stupid to keep proper records? "No, I was trying to understand." "Understand what?" The question hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Mara took a breath. "How you survive up here? What you need? What I should—" She stopped, tried again. "I'm your wife now. Whether either of us wanted that or not, it's done. And I don't know how to be a wife to someone I don't know, in a place I don't understand. So yes, I looked at your records, because I need to know what kind of life I'm living now." Rowan stared at her, the papers clutched in his hands. Some of the anger faded from his face, replaced by something harder to read. "This isn't the valley," he said finally. "Up here, you don't get to know everything. You don't get to understand everything. You just survive." "I understand that. Do you?" He set the papers down on the table, not gently. "Because you're standing in my cabin, reorganizing my supplies, reading my private records like you have some right to them, like this is your home, isn't it?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "You married me. You brought me here. What exactly am I supposed to do? Sit in the corner and wait for you to tell me when I'm allowed to breathe?" His jaw tightened. "I brought you here because I made a deal, because my land needs the water rights your father can provide. That's all this is. A transaction. I know that. Then act like it. He grabbed the rifle from the corner and walked back out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Mara stood alone in the cabin, shaking. Not from cold this time, from anger. She looked at the trade records still spread across the table, at the reorganized shelves, at the clean floor and the steady fire, and all the work she'd done that morning trying to make sense of this place. Then she sat down and started copying the records into a new ledger she'd found wrapped at the bottom of the trunk. If Rowan Vance wanted to survive on pride and silence, that was his choice. But she was done apologizing for existing. The storm hit just after dark, rattling the cabin walls and howling down the chimney. Mara fed the fire, kept it burning high and hot the way Rowan had told her to. She made a simple dinner, beans and salt pork boiled together, bread toasted over the flames, and left Rowan's portion warming by the hearth. He didn't come back. By the time full dark fell, she was starting to worry. The wind was vicious, screaming around the cabin like something alive. Snow pelted the windows so hard it sounded like thrown gravel. What if he'd gotten lost? What if he'd fallen? What if... The door banged open. Rowan stumbled in, covered head to foot in snow, his face raw and red from the wind. Mara jumped up. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." But his voice was rough, strained. "You're frozen. Come here." She pulled one of the chairs closer to the fire. "Sit down." "I said I'm fine." "And I said sit down." Maybe it was the force in her voice. Maybe he was just too cold to argue. Either way, he sat. Mara pulled off his coat, which was stiff with ice. His hands were white, the fingers barely moving. She grabbed the fur blanket, wrapped it around his shoulders, then filled a cup with water and set it to warm by the fire. "What were you doing out there?" she demanded. "Checking the stable, making sure the roof wasn't coming off." "In this? Better to check now than wake up to dead horses." He flexed his fingers slowly, wincing. The color was coming back, but painful. Mara had seen frostbite before. Her father had lost 2 toes one winter from being too stubborn to come in out of the cold. She knelt in front of Rowan, took his hands in hers. They were like ice. "Don't rub them," she said. "That makes it worse. Just let them warm up slow." He looked down at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "How do you know that?" "My father. He worked in a blizzard once trying to find lost sheep. Nearly lost his feet." "Did he find the sheep?" "No, they'd already frozen." Rowan's mouth twitched. It might have been the start of a smile. "Your father's a stubborn man." "Yes." Mara held his hands carefully, breathing warm air across them. "He is." They sat like that for a while, the storm raging outside, the fire crackling between them. Slowly, the white faded from Rowan's fingers. The shaking stopped. "There's food," Mara said quietly. "If you're hungry." "I'm hungry." She brought him the beans and pork, the toasted bread. He ate quickly, efficiently, like a man used to taking food where he could find it. When he was done, he set the bowl aside and looked at her. "The cabin looks different." "I know, I'm sorry if I overstepped." "It looks better." He cut her off, his voice gruff. "More organized, easier to find things." Mara blinked. "Oh." "The records, though." He nodded toward the table where she'd left the new ledger. "Those are still mine." "I know." "But you copied them anyway." "Yes." "Why?" She met his eyes. "Because they're a mess. Because you can't plan for winter if you don't know what winter costs. Because a few years of bad trades could cost you everything, and you wouldn't even know until it was too late." "You sound like a merchant." "I sound like someone who helped run a failing sheep operation for 5 years, and watched my father make the same mistakes over and over." Rowan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What kind of mistakes?" "Selling low because he needed quick money. Buying high because he didn't plan ahead. Not tracking which buyers paid fair prices and which ones cheated him. Not knowing if he was making profit or just breaking even until it was too late to change anything." "And you think I'm making the same mistakes?" "I think you don't know if you are or not. Because you're not tracking enough information to tell." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind screamed. "Show me," he said finally. "What?" "The ledger. Show me what you did." Mara retrieved it from the table, brought it to the fire. She sat beside him, opening to the first page where she'd started reorganizing his records. "This is last spring's fur sales," she said. "You wrote sold furs, got fair price, but you didn't note how many pelts, what type, or what the price actually was." "I remember what I sold." "Do you remember what the buyer paid per pelt for fox versus beaver?" Do you remember if he paid the same rate in spring as he did the previous fall? Do you remember which buyer gave you the best price so you know who to go to next time? Rowan frowned. I go to whoever's buying. But if you tracked it, you'd know who pays best. You could plan your trap lines around what they want. Focus on the furs that bring the most money. She turned the page. And here, winter supplies. You bought enough. But was it actually enough? Did you run short of anything? Did you buy too much of something else and waste money? I made it through winter. Barely, I'm guessing. His eyes narrowed. What makes you say that? The flour sacks. You had 3 of them, all partial. That means you bought more partway through because you ran out. Same with the dried beans. And I saw the marks on your belt. You tightened it 3 notches from fall to spring. You lost weight. A lot of it. Rowan's hand went to his belt unconsciously. Winter's hard. Everyone loses weight. Not if they plan properly. The silence stretched between them, tense and uncertain. Then Rowan laughed. It was a rough sound, rusty from disuse, but genuine. You're telling me I'm a terrible businessman. I'm telling you that you're a good survivor but a poor planner. There's a difference? A big one. Survival is day to day. Planning is making sure the days keep coming. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Mara saw something shift in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. Your father's sheep operation, he said. It's failing because he can't plan. Yes, but you could have fixed it if he'd listened to you. He never listened to me. I was just the daughter who was good with numbers. Lydia was the valuable one. It wasn't a question. Mara closed the ledger. Lydia was the beautiful one. That's what mattered. Not up here, it doesn't. She looked at him sharply. What? Beauty. Rowan stood, moved to the window where snow was piling against the glass. Doesn't keep you warm, doesn't bring in food, doesn't help you survive when the temperature drops to 20 below, and the nearest neighbor is a 3-hour ride away. He turned back to her. Up here, the only thing that matters is whether you can do what needs doing. And can I? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. Rowan looked at the reorganized cabin, at the steady fire, at the ledger in her hands. You're still here, he said. That's more than most people manage on their first day. It wasn't exactly a compliment, but it wasn't nothing either. Mara stood, suddenly exhausted. Where should I sleep? The bed's yours. I'll take the floor by the fire. You don't have to. I'm not sleeping in that bed. His voice went flat again. I made it for someone else. Now it's yours. That's the end of it. He pulled furs from the corner, the ones she'd folded earlier, and spread them in front of the hearth. Then he lay down, pulled the blanket over himself, and turned his back to her. Dismissed. Mara climbed into the bed, still wearing her dress because she had nothing else, and wasn't about to undress in the same room as a strange man, husband or not. The mattress was thin, the blanket scratchy. Through the wall, she could hear the wind trying to tear the cabin apart. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept turning over everything that had happened. The chapel, the ride, the scattered furs, Rowan's anger, his rough gratitude, the way he'd looked at her when she'd shown him the ledger, like she might actually be useful, not beautiful, not charming, not anything like Lydia, just useful. It should have felt insulting. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing anyone had said to her in years. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Mara woke to find Rowan already up, the fire rebuilt, coffee boiling in a battered pot over the flames. Storm's past, he said when he saw her stirring. I need to check the trap lines, see if anything got caught before the snow hit. You should stay here. Keep the fire going. I can help. He looked at her. You ever check a trap line? No. Ever skin an animal? No. Ever walk 5 miles through waist-deep snow? No, but then you'd slow me down. Not cruel, just factual. Stay here. Keep warm. I'll be back by midday. He left before she could argue. Mara stood alone in the cabin, frustration burning in her chest. She wasn't useless. She'd proven that yesterday with the organization, with the ledger, but Rowan still saw her as a burden, as someone to be managed and worked around. Fine. If he wanted her to stay in the cabin, she'd stay in the cabin. But she wouldn't sit idle. She spent the morning going through the supplies more thoroughly, found things Rowan had clearly forgotten he owned, A set of steel needles, good quality, wrapped in oilcloth at the back of a shelf. A spool of strong thread. Leather scraps, probably left over from mending harnesses. She found his spare clothes in a trunk by the bed. 2 shirts, both needing buttons. Trousers with torn knees. A coat missing half its lining. By the time Rowan returned, she'd mended everything. He stopped in the doorway, 2 rabbits hanging from his belt, and stared at his clothes laid out on the table, neat and repaired. "What's this?" "Your shirts were missing buttons. The coat lining was ripped. I fixed them." "I didn't ask you to." "I know." He set the rabbits on the table, pulled off his gloves, picked up one of the shirts, examining the neat stitches. "You're good at this. I've been mending my father's clothes since I was 12. "Lydia didn't help?" "Lydia said sewing was for old women." Mara kept her voice neutral. "She preferred embroidery, decorative work." Rowan snorted. "Decorative work doesn't keep the wind out." He pulled off his old coat, put on the newly mended one. It fit him well, broad across the shoulders, long enough to keep the snow out. He moved in it, testing the weight, and nodded. "Good work." 2 words. But something in Mara's chest loosened. "The rabbits," she said. "Do you want me to help prepare them? You ever dress game?" "I've plucked chickens." "Not the same." But he pulled out a knife, laid one of the rabbits on the table. "I'll show you. Pay attention. Up here. You waste nothing." He worked quickly, his hands sure and practiced. The skin came off in one piece, set aside for scraping and tanning later. The meat was portioned efficiently. Haunches, backstraps, ribs. The organs went into a separate bowl. "Liver and heart are good eating," he said. "Kidneys too, if you cook them right. The rest goes to the dogs." "What dogs?" "Don't have any yet. But I'm planning to get some come spring. Can't run trap lines efficiently without dogs." He handed her the second rabbit and the knife. "Your turn." Mara's hand shook slightly as she took them. The rabbit was still warm, its fur soft. She'd never done this before, never taken something from living to food, but she'd watched. She knew the steps. The first cut was awkward, the second better. By the time she'd finished, the rabbit was dressed. Not as cleanly as Rowan's, but completely. "Not bad," he said. "You'll get better with practice." They prepared dinner together in silence. Rabbit stew with the last of the potatoes and onions from Rowan's winter stores. Mara chopped while Rowan tended the pot, adjusting the heat, tasting, adding salt and dried herbs she hadn't known he had. When it was ready, they sat at the table and ate. The stew was good, simple, but rich and warming. "This is better than what I make myself," Rowan said after a while. "You made it." "You prepared the ingredients properly. Cut everything the right size so it cooked evenly. That matters." Another small acknowledgement, another tiny shift. After dinner, Mara pulled out the ledger again. "Can I ask you some questions? About the trading?" Rowan looked wary. "What kind of questions?" "The buyers you deal with. Which ones are fair, which ones try to cheat? What they look for in furs, what makes a pelt worth more or less?" "Why?" "Because if I'm going to track this properly, I need to understand the business." He studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled his chair closer to the table. "All right, but this stays between us. Trading information is valuable. You don't share it freely." "Understood." He started talking and Mara started writing. Names of buyers, their locations, their reputations, what they paid for different types of pelts, how to judge quality, the thickness of the fur, the color, whether it had been taken in prime season, which buyers paid in cash, which traded goods, which would try to short you if you didn't count carefully. "Marcus Webb down in Silver Creek," Rowan said. "He pays fair for fox and beaver, but he cheats on coyote, says the fur's too rough when really he's just trying to drive the price down. Don't sell coyote to him." Mara wrote it down. "Who do you sell coyote to?" "Trading post in Helena. They ship east, sell to coat makers. They'll pay double what Webb offers." "Then why ever sell to Webb?" "Because Helena's a week's travel, and sometimes I need the cash before winter hits." Mara made a note. "How much do you make in a good season?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because I need to know if you're pricing yourself right, if the buyers are taking advantage because you don't know what your work is worth." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he named a figure. Mara's pen stopped. "That's all?" "It's enough to get by. It's not enough to thrive, not if you're putting in full seasons of work." She pulled out the records from the previous spring. This buyer here, he paid you how much per beaver pelt, Rowan told her. Mara did quick math in her head. He underpaid you by at least 30%. That's the market rate. That's what he told you was the market rate. Did you check with other buyers? I don't have time to ride around comparing prices. I need to sell and get back up the mountain before the weather turns. Then he's counting on that. Counting on you being in a hurry. Counting on you not knowing any better. Rowan's hands curled into fists on the table. You're saying I'm a fool. I'm saying you're being cheated. There's a difference. She turned the ledger to face him, showed him the numbers she'd calculated. If you'd sold to the Helena Post instead, even accounting for the travel time and cost, you'd have cleared 40% more profit. Over a season, that's the difference between scraping by and actually building something. He stared at the numbers, his expression unreadable. I don't like being cheated, he said finally. Then stop letting it happen. His eyes met hers. And how do I do that? Ride to every trading post in Montana before selling? No, you plan better. Track your sales across seasons. Build relationships with the fair buyers and cut out the ones who cheat. And you don't sell when you're desperate. You save enough to give yourself options. Easier said than done. Everything's easier said than done. That doesn't mean it's impossible. Rowan leaned back in his chair, studying her. You really think you can fix this? I think I can make it better. If you let me. The fire crackled between them. Outside, the night was dark and still, the kind of stillness that only comes after a big storm. All right, Rowan said finally. Show me what you need. They worked until late into the night, going over records, making plans. Mara asked questions, and Rowan answered them, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes with surprising detail. He knew this land, knew the trade routes, knew which months were best for which types of furs. He just didn't know how to turn that knowledge into lasting profit. By the time they finally stopped, Mara's hand was cramping from writing, and Rowan looked exhausted. Get some sleep, he said, standing stiffly. Tomorrow I'll show you the storage shed. You should know what supplies we have before the next storm hits. All right? He moved to his place by the fire, started spreading out the furs. Rowan, Mara said. He turned. Thank you. For listening. His expression softened slightly. You're my wife. Like it or not, your survival depends on mine. Makes sense to work together. It wasn't romantic, wasn't even particularly kind, but it was honest, and for now that was enough. The days fell into a rhythm that felt less like living and more like enduring. Mara woke before dawn, rebuilt the fire, started coffee. Rowan left to check traps or chop wood or do whatever mysterious mountain work kept him gone for hours. She cleaned, mended, organized, cooked. He came back, ate, spoke a few words, then retreated into silence like it was armor. But things were changing, small things, quiet things. Rowan stopped throwing his wet clothes on the floor, started hanging them by the fire to dry. Mara stopped asking permission before moving things around, just did what made sense. They developed an unspoken language of practical gestures. He'd bring in extra wood without being asked. She'd have his coffee ready when he came back from the cold. It wasn't warmth, but it wasn't hostility either. 3 weeks into the marriage, the first real test came. Mara was reorganizing the storage shed behind the cabin, taking inventory of winter supplies, when she found the problem. The flour sacks, all 3 of them that Rowan had insisted were full enough, had holes chewed through the bottom. Mice, maybe rats. The flour inside was contaminated, mixed with droppings and shredded burlap. She stood in the freezing shed, staring at what had to be 40 pounds of ruined flour, and felt her stomach drop. This was bad. Flour was survival. Bread, biscuits, thickening for stews, half their meals depended on it. And the nearest trading post was a day's hard ride down the mountain, assuming the trails were even passable. She found Rowan splitting wood behind the cabin, his axe rising and falling in steady rhythm. Sweat darkened his shirt despite the cold. We have a problem, she said. He buried the axe in the stump, turned to face her. What kind of problem? The flour's ruined. Mice got into all 3 sacks. His face went still. All of it? All of it. He crossed to the shed in long strides, Mara following. Inside, he crouched by the sacks, sifting the contaminated flour through his fingers. His jaw worked, and she could see him calculating, trying to figure out how bad this was. How much do we have left that's still good? He asked finally. Maybe 5 pounds in the tin inside, that's it. That won't last 2 weeks. I know. He stood, brushed his hands on his pants. I'll ride down to Silver Creek tomorrow. Buy more. The trails are barely passable. You said so yourself yesterday. Don't have a choice. Yes, you do. Mara crossed her arms against the cold. We ration what we have, stretch it, make it last until the weather clears. And eat what in the meantime? Meat. We have plenty of dried venison, potatoes, the beans. We won't starve. We'll be miserable. Better miserable than dead because you tried to ride down a mountain in unstable snow. Rowan's eyes narrowed. I've made that ride in worse conditions. I'm sure you have. And one day you'll try it and not come back. And then where will I be? You'd probably celebrate. The words came out bitter, automatic, like he'd been waiting to say them. Mara felt something crack open in her chest. You really think that? That I'd be happy if you died? Wouldn't you? He gestured at the shed, the mountain, everything. You're stuck here with a man you don't know, in a place you didn't choose, living a life you never wanted. Tell me I'm wrong. You're not wrong about what I didn't choose, Mara said carefully. But that doesn't mean I want you dead. We're in this together now. Your survival is my survival. I thought you understood that. He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You meant that, when you said it before. Of course I meant it. Most people just say things. I'm not most people. A ghost of something that might have been a smile touched his mouth. No, you're not. The tension broke, not completely, but enough. We ration the flour, Rowan said finally. Make it last 3 weeks if we can. By then the weather should clear enough for a safe trip down. Agreed. They walked back to the cabin together. Inside, Mara pulled out the remaining flour, divided it into daily portions. It looked impossibly small spread across the table. We're going to get sick of venison, Rowan observed. We're already sick of venison. It's about to get worse. But there was something almost like humor in his voice. Dark humor, survival humor, but humor nonetheless. That night, Mara made a stew heavy on meat and light on everything else. They ate in silence, both pretending not to notice how much they missed bread. Tomorrow I'll set better traps in the shed, Rowan said, mopping up the last of his stew with a piece of precious bread. Should have done it sooner. Should have stored the flour in sealed tins, Mara added. I saw some in the corner. We should transfer everything that mice can get to. I'll help. They worked after dinner, moving supplies, setting traps, making the shed rodent-proof. It was cold, miserable work, but they did it together, and somehow that made it bearable. When they finally came back inside, fingers numb and noses red, Rowan poured them each a small measure of whiskey from a bottle Mara hadn't known he had. For the cold, he said, handing her a cup. She sipped it carefully. It burned going down, but the warmth that followed was worth it. Where'd you get this? Made it myself, last winter when I had nothing better to do. It's terrible. I know. He drank his in one swallow. But it works. Mara laughed before she could stop herself. A real laugh, surprised out of her by the casual honesty of it. Rowan looked at her, startled. What? Nothing, just you're very matter-of-fact about things being terrible. Why lie about it? Terrible's terrible whether you admit it or not. Most people would try to defend it, say it's not that bad, or it'll get better with age or something. Most people are idiots. He poured himself another measure. You want more? No. One's enough for me. He nodded, corked the bottle, put it back on the shelf. Then he stood there, looking like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. What? Mara asked. The flower situation. You handled it well. Didn't panic, didn't blame me for not preventing it. Just looked for solutions. What else would I do? Most people would have screamed, or cried, or both. I'm not most people, Mara said again. You keep forgetting that. I'm starting to remember. The next morning brought fresh snow and bitter cold. Rowan went out to check the traps, both the hunting traps and the new mouse traps in the shed. Mara stayed inside, working on the ledger, tracking their food supplies, calculating how long everything would last. The numbers weren't great, but they weren't impossible either. She was so focused on the calculations that she didn't hear the door open, didn't realize Rowan was back until he spoke. We caught something. She looked up. His expression was strange. Not quite pleased, but not unhappy either. What? Come see. She followed him outside, across the snow-covered clearing to the line of traps he'd set in the woods. In the third trap, struggling weakly, was a turkey. A big one, probably 15 pounds. "I'll be damned," Rowan said. "Haven't caught one of these in years." "Is it still alive?" "Barely. Won't last long in this cold, though." He crouched by the trap, examining the bird with the practiced eye of someone who knew exactly what he was looking at. "This is good meat. Better than venison. And the feathers, we can use those too." He dispatched the bird quickly, humanely. Mara looked away for the actual moment, but forced herself to watch everything after. This was her life now. She needed to understand all of it. Back at the cabin, Rowan showed her how to pluck and dress the turkey. It took over an hour, their hands growing numb despite working inside. When they were done, the bird was ready for roasting, and the table was covered in soft brown feathers. "Don't throw those out," Rowan said. "We'll save them. Good for stuffing pillows, insulating clothes. Nothing goes to waste." "You said that about the rabbits, too. It's true about everything up here. You waste something, you might be wasting the thing that would have kept you alive later." That night they roasted the turkey over the fire, and the smell that filled the cabin was almost unbearably good. Rich and savory, and nothing like the endless venison they'd been eating. When it was done, they ate until they couldn't eat anymore. The meat was tender, flavorful, perfect. "This is the best thing I've eaten since I got here," Mara said, reaching for another piece. "Best thing I've eaten in 6 months," Rowan agreed. "Maybe longer." They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from shared satisfaction. Outside, the wind picked up again, but inside they were warm and full, and for the first time since Mara had arrived, something almost like contentment settled over the cabin. After dinner, while Rowan cleaned the carcass for soup stock, Mara gathered the feathers into a clean sack. Her hands moved automatically, sorting them by size, her mind wandering. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Rowan looked up from his work. "Depends what it is." "Why did you really agree to marry Lydia?" His hands stilled. "I told you, the land rights, the water access. I know that's part of it, but you could have negotiated those rights without marriage. Could have made a straight business deal with my father." "Your father wanted the alliance, the family connection. And you agreed because—" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down the knife, wiped his hands on a rag. "Because I'm 32 years old, and I've spent the last 10 years alone on this mountain. Because every winter gets a little harder, and I'm starting to understand that surviving alone isn't the same as living." He looked at her. "Because I thought maybe it was time to build something that would last beyond one man's lifetime. You wanted a family. I wanted a future that didn't end when I did." The honesty of it hit Mara hard. She'd assumed Rowan was content in his isolation, that he preferred the mountain silence to human company. But he was lonely, had been lonely for years. "And then Lydia ran," she said quietly. "And then Lydia ran." He picked up the knife again, went back to work. "Can't say I blame her. This isn't a life for someone who wants more than survival." "Is that what you think I want? Just survival?" "I don't know what you want. You haven't said." Mara thought about that. What did she want? She'd spent so long being invisible, being the practical sister, the helpful daughter, that she'd stopped asking herself that question. "I want to matter," she said finally. "I want to do something that makes a difference. I want to build something that lasts." She looked at him. "Same as you, I think." Rowan's hand stopped moving again. He studied her across the table, and something in his expression changed, softened. "Then maybe we can do that," he said. "Together." It wasn't a declaration of love, wasn't even a promise, really, but it was something, a foundation, a beginning. "Maybe we can," Mara agreed. The weather held cold but clear for the next few days. Rowan used the break to haul firewood, check the roof, reinforce the stable walls. Mara worked inside preparing the turkey leftovers, organizing supplies, updating the ledger with their current inventory. They were settling into something that almost felt like partnership. Then, 5 weeks after the wedding, Ruth Carver came up the mountain. Mara heard the dogs first, the barking carried across the snow, sharp and excited. She went to the window, saw 2 figures on horseback emerging from the tree line. Ruth and another woman Mara didn't recognize, both bundled in furs, both looking grim. "Rowan," she called, "we have visitors." He came in from the woodpile, took one look out the window, and his whole body tensed. "That's not a social call," he said. "How do you know?" "Ruth doesn't ride up here unless something's wrong." He opened the door as Ruth dismounted, the other woman following suit. Up close, Mara could see they were both exhausted, their faces wind-burned and drawn. "Ruth," Rowan said, "what happened?" "Marcus Webb happened." Ruth's voice was tight with anger. "That cheating bastard is trying to buy up land rights from the Valley families. Offering cash they can't refuse, getting them to sign over water access and winter passage routes." Rowan's jaw clenched. "He can't do that. Those rights are protected by territorial law. He's found loopholes. Old survey markers that were never properly recorded. Disputed boundaries from before Montana was organized. He's got lawyers, Rowan. Good ones. And he's using them to squeeze out everyone who can't afford to fight back." The other woman spoke up. "He came to my family last week, offered us $500 for our creek access. My father almost took it. $500 is more money than we've seen in years, but I did the math. That creek access is worth 10 times that in trade value over a decade. Webb's stealing from us, but he's making it look like charity." Rowan looked at Mara. "Show them." Mara blinked. "Show them what?" "The ledger, the trade records, the analysis you did." Understanding dawned. She went to the table, brought back the carefully organized ledger. Ruth and the other woman crowded around as Mara opened it, showing them the calculations she'd done, the price comparisons, the evidence of systematic underpayment by certain traders. "Webb's one of the worst," Mara said, pointing to the relevant entries. "He's been cheating on fur prices for years, paying maybe 60% of fair value. And if he controls the land access, he controls who can trade where. He'll have a monopoly." Ruth's face darkened as she read. "He's been doing this to all of us. Not just him," Rowan added. "There are 3 or 4 buyers who work together, keeping prices artificially low. They've divided up the territory, agreed not to compete with each other. That way we have no choice but to sell to whoever controls our area." "That's illegal," the other woman said. "Prove it," Ruth shot back. "They're careful, never put anything in writing, and who's going to listen to a bunch of mountain families with no lawyers and no connections?" Silence fell, heavy and frustrated. Then Mara spoke. "What if you had proof? Written records of the price fixing, the land grabbing, all of it." Ruth looked at her. "You have that?" "Not yet, but I could build it. If the other families would share their trade records, let me compare prices across buyers and seasons, I could document the pattern, show that it's systematic, not just bad luck or poor negotiating." "And then what?" the other woman asked. "Even with proof, who do we take it to?" "The Territorial Governor's Office," Rowan said. "There's a commission that handles trade disputes. If we can show organized price fixing and fraudulent land claims, they have to investigate." Ruth shook her head. "That's weeks of travel to Helena. Weeks we don't have. Webb's moving fast, getting families to sign before they understand what they're giving up." "Then we move faster," Mara said. "How many families are we talking about?" 8, maybe 10 that are directly affected. "Can you get them to bring their records here? Or somewhere central where I can review them?" Ruth and the other woman exchanged glances. "You do that?" Ruth asked. "Help organize this." "It's my fight too now," Mara said. "My husband's rights are at stake. Our future. Of course I'll help." Something shifted in Ruth's expression. The skepticism that had been there since the wedding, the clear belief that Valley Soft Mara wouldn't last a month, faded slightly. "All right," Ruth said. "I'll spread the word. We'll meet at the Timber Creek Junction in 3 days. That's neutral ground, accessible to everyone. Bring what records you have, and we'll see what we can build." After Ruth and the other woman left, Mara and Rowan stood in the cabin, processing what had just happened. "You didn't have to volunteer," Rowan said. "This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is. I'm your wife, aren't I? Your problems are my problems." "In name only." "Is that what you think?" Mara turned to face him. "That I'm just here in name? That I don't care what happens to you, to this place, to our future?" "I don't know what you care about. We've been married 5 weeks, and we barely know each other." "Then maybe it's time we changed that." She crossed her arms. "Ask me something. Anything. Something real." Rowan looked thrown. "What?" "You said you don't know me, so ask. What do you want to know?" He was quiet for a moment, clearly not expecting this. Then he said, "Why didn't you stop Lydia? That night when she left. You were awake. You saw her go. Why didn't you say anything?" The question hit harder than Mara expected. She'd been asking herself the same thing for weeks. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe because some part of me was glad to see her go. Maybe because I was tired of being invisible, and I thought, I don't know what I thought, that if she left I'd finally matter. finally be seen as something other than the lesser sister. You regret it? I regret that my father was humiliated, that your expectations were broken. But do I regret that Lydia's gone and I'm here instead? She met his eyes. No, I don't regret that, not anymore. Rowan studied her, and Mara saw something change in his face, a wall coming down, just a little. I'm glad you're here too, he said quietly. Took me a while to figure that out, but I am. Because I'm useful. Because you're strong, there's a difference. Mara felt something warm unfold in her chest. Not love. They weren't there yet, might never be. But respect. Recognition. It was enough. It was 3 days until the meeting, she said. I need to prepare. Figure out what questions to ask, what information we need to build a solid case. I'll help. They worked through the evening, making lists, planning their approach. Rowan knew the families, knew their situations. Mara knew numbers, knew how to find patterns in chaos. Together, they made a formidable team. Late that night, as they were finally preparing for sleep, Rowan spoke from his place by the fire. Mara? Yes? Thank you for stepping up, for helping with this. You don't have to thank me. We're partners in this, remember? A pause. Then, yeah, we are. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Mara created detailed forms for collecting information, wrote out questions, organized everything into a system that would let her compare data quickly. Rowan checked with neighboring families, confirmed they'd be at the meeting, made sure everyone understood what was at stake. The morning of the meeting dawned cold and gray. They left early, riding double on Rowan's horse with Mara's carefully organized papers wrapped in oilcloth and strapped to the saddle. The Timber Creek Junction was a natural clearing where 3 trails met, sheltered by a rock overhang that provided some protection from wind. When they arrived, 7 families were already there, gathered around a small fire, looking worried and determined in equal measure. Ruth made the introductions. Mara recognized a few faces from the wedding, but most were strangers, mountain people, hard people, people who looked at her with open skepticism. This is Mara Vance, Ruth said, and Mara noticed she used the married name, not Hale, a small gesture, but significant. She's going to help us organize our records, build a case against Webb and the other buyers. She's Valley-born, an older man said flatly. Why should we trust her? Because she's the one who figured out we were being cheated in the first place, Rowan said, his voice carrying an edge. And because she's offering to help when she doesn't have to, that's why. The man looked at Mara, assessing. You really think you can make sense of all our scattered records? I can try, Mara said, but I need everyone's cooperation, full records, honest numbers. If you hide things or exaggerate, the whole case falls apart. We're honest people, a woman said sharply. I'm sure you are, but sometimes people remember things wrong, or estimate instead of recording exact figures. I need to know what's verified fact and what's best guess. Otherwise, the lawyers will tear our case apart. The woman's expression softened slightly. That's fair. They spent the next 4 hours going through records. It was tedious, meticulous work. Mara asked questions, compared numbers, found discrepancies, and asked for clarifications. Some families had good records. Others had almost nothing, just memories and rough estimates. But patterns emerged. Webb consistently paid 20 to 40% below fair market value. 2 other traders did the same. And the timing of their purchases was coordinated. They'd each focus on different families in different seasons, never competing, never driving prices up through bidding. It was systematic, deliberate, provable. By the time the sun was setting, Mara had filled 3 notebooks with data. Her hand cramped, her head ached, but she had what they needed. This is good, she told the gathered families. This is enough to show a pattern. Now I need 2 weeks to organize it properly, write up a formal complaint, document everything in a way that will stand up to legal scrutiny. 2 weeks is a long time, the older man said. Webb's still moving, still buying up rights. Then tell everyone to stop signing, Ruth said firmly. No more deals until we know where we stand legally. Spread the word. Anyone who signs with Webb before this is resolved is on their own. Nods around the circle. Agreement. As the families dispersed, heading back to their scattered homes, Ruth pulled Mara aside. You did good work today, she said. Better than I expected. You didn't think I could do it? No, I didn't. Ruth's honesty was almost refreshing. Thought you'd be useless up here, soft, city-minded. I'm not city-minded, I'm valley-minded. There's a difference. Is there? Valley people farm. They plan seasons, track markets, survive on careful management. City people have stores and services and safety nets. We don't. So yes, there's a difference. Ruth smiled. A real smile this time. Maybe there is. And maybe I was wrong about you. Maybe you were. On the ride back, Rowan was quiet. Mara sat behind him on the horse, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance, feeling the solid warmth of him through his coat. You were impressive today, he said finally. I was organized. That's different than impressive. Not up here, it isn't. He glanced back at her. Those families respect efficiency. Respect someone who can do what needs doing without drama or wasted time. You earned their trust today. Did I earn yours? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You've had my trust for a while now. I just didn't tell you. Something warm bloomed in Mara's chest. Not love, still, but something close to it, something growing. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and when they reached the cabin, Rowan helped her down from the horse with a gentleness that hadn't been there before. Inside, he built up the fire while she unpacked the notebooks, spreading them across the table. 2 weeks of work ahead of her. 2 weeks of organizing, writing, building an airtight case. I'll help, Rowan said, reading her thoughts, with whatever you need. You hate paperwork. I hate cheating more. He pulled a chair up beside her. Show me where to start. They worked late into the night, and for the first time since Mara had arrived on this mountain, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The complaint was nearly finished when the writer came. Mara had been working for 11 days straight, hunched over the table until her back ached and her eyes burned. The formal document was 23 pages long now, dense with evidence, cross-referenced and organized in a way that even a hostile lawyer would have trouble picking apart. Rowan had helped where he could, verifying facts, adding details she'd missed, but mostly he'd kept the cabin running while she worked herself half to death. She was copying the final section when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. Rowan was at the window before she could stand. Someone's coming hard, pushing their horse too much for this terrain. He grabbed the rifle, moved to the door. Mara's heart kicked up. Hard riding meant urgency. Urgency usually meant trouble. The rider burst into the clearing, a young man Mara recognized from the Timber Creek meeting, one of Ruth's nephews. His horse was lathered, its sides heaving. Rowan, he shouted, half falling from the saddle. You need to come. Now. Rowan was out the door before the boy finished speaking. What happened? It's your father. He's at Ruth's place with a judge and some Valley people. Says he's here to annul your marriage. Says it's illegal, that you were coerced, that... The boy struggled for breath. Ruth sent me to warn you. They're coming up here tomorrow morning. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Mara gripped the door frame, the words echoing in her head. Annul. Illegal. Coerced. Rowan's face had gone completely blank. The expression she'd learned meant he was feeling too much and showing none of it. My father's been dead to me for 8 years, he said quietly. Why is he here now? I don't know, but Ruth said to tell you he's brought papers, legal papers, and the judge has already signed on to whatever he's planning. Rowan turned, looked at Mara. Their eyes met, and she saw the question there, the uncertainty. Get inside, he told the boy. Warm up. Feed your horse. We need to think. Back in the cabin, Rowan paced while Mara tried to make sense of what was happening. The boy, his name was Danny, collapsed into a chair, gratefully accepting the coffee she poured him. Tell us everything, Rowan said. From the beginning. Danny wrapped his hands around the cup. Your father rode in yesterday afternoon with 4 other men. A judge named Carlson, 2 men who looked like lawyers, and another man in expensive clothes. Ruth said that one's a landowner from the Eastern Territory, owns half of Silver Creek Valley. What's his name? Whitmore. Charles Whitmore. Rowan stopped pacing. Never heard of him. Well, he's heard of you, or at least heard of your land. They spent all evening at Ruth's talking legal talk. She couldn't hear most of it, but she caught enough. They're claiming the marriage was entered under false pretenses, that Mara was substituted for Lydia without proper consent, that the whole thing is invalid. That's not how territorial law works, Mara said. The contract was for a marriage alliance between the Hale and Vance families. The specific bride wasn't legally binding. Danny looked at her with surprise. You know law? I know enough to know they're lying. Maybe they are, Rowan said grimly. But if they've got a judge willing to sign their papers, truth doesn't matter much. Why would a judge do that? Money, favors, pressure. Rowan ran a hand through his hair. My father's well connected in the lowlands, rich, influential. If he wants this marriage gone badly enough, he'll find a judge willing to make it happen. But why? Mara stood, moving to the table where her complaint lay. What does he gain? That's what I can't figure out. Danny cleared his throat. Ruth said, and this is just what she heard, that your father wants you to marry someone else, someone appropriate, the daughter of that Whitmore man. She's with them. Arrived this morning. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. It's about land consolidation, Mara said slowly. Your father wants to connect your territory to Whitmore's holdings, create a continuous corridor from the high country to the lowland valleys. That kind of control would be worth, she calculated quickly, tens of thousands of dollars in trade rights alone. Rowan's laugh was bitter. Of course it is. It's always about money with him. Who is your father? Mara asked. You've never told me. Because it doesn't matter. He stopped being my father when I was 24, and he tried to force me into the family business. Wanted me to be a landowner, a businessman, a respectable son. I wanted to live up here on my own terms, so I left. Haven't spoken to him since. But the land here is legally mine. I bought it with money I earned trapping, filed the claim myself, built everything from nothing. He has no legal right to it. Unless he can prove you're unfit, Danny said quietly. Ruth heard them talking about that too. Mental incompetence. Saying a man who'd accept Mara instead of Lydia must not be in his right mind. Rowan's hands clenched into fists. That's convenient. Mara felt cold settling into her bones, and it had nothing to do with the temperature. They were going to take everything. The land, the marriage, Rowan's independence, and they'd use her as evidence, proof that Rowan had made a decision so absurd, so inexplicable, that he clearly couldn't be trusted to manage his own affairs. We have to fight this, she said. How? Rowan turned to her. They have a judge, lawyers. My father has connections I can't match. What do we have? Mara looked at the complaint on the table. At 11 days of meticulous work documenting corruption and price fixing. At proof that the lowland businessmen, men like Whitmore, like Rowan's father, had been systematically cheating mountain families for years. We have leverage, she said. Both men looked at her. The complaint, the evidence of price fixing. If your father's business partners have been involved in illegal trade practices, that makes him vulnerable too. Men like that don't want scrutiny, don't want investigations. Rowan crossed to the table, looked down at the pages. You think we can use this to make him back off? I think we can make it very expensive for him to push forward. If we threaten to take this to the territorial governor, to open up investigations into all his business dealings, he might decide it's not worth it. Or he might push harder, use his influence to bury the complaint before it goes anywhere. Maybe, but at least it's something. Danny stood. I need to get back before Ruth worries. But she said to tell you, whatever you decide, the Mountain families stand with you. They're ready to come up here if you need them. Tell her we appreciate it, Rowan said. But this is my fight. I won't drag others into it. After Danny left, Mara and Rowan sat at the table in heavy silence. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the snow orange and gold. I should have known he wouldn't let it go, Rowan said finally. Should have known he'd come eventually, try to drag me back into his world. This isn't your fault. Isn't it? I'm the one who made the deal with your father. I'm the one who agreed to take you when Lydia ran. Every choice that led to this moment was mine. And mine, Mara reminded him. I walked down that aisle. I stayed when I could have run. I chose this too. He looked at her, something raw in his eyes. Why? Why did you stay? You could have gone back to the valley after the wedding, could have annulled it yourself, claimed you were forced. Why are you still here? The question hung between them, demanding honesty. Mara thought about Lydia's letter, still folded in her drawer, about her sister's escape, her freedom, her refusal to be trapped, and about her own choice to stay, to build, to matter. Because, for the first time in my life, I'm not invisible, she said quietly. Down in the valley, I was just the other sister, the useful one, the one people forgot existed until they needed something. But up here, she gestured at the cabin, at the organized shelves and the careful records and the work they'd done together. Up here, I matter. What I do makes a difference. You see me, really see me, not as a replacement for someone better, but as myself. Why would I give that up? Rowan's expression softened. You've made this place better. Made me better. I should have told you that before. You're telling me now. He reached across the table and, for the first time since they'd married, took her hand. His palm was calloused, warm, solid. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, I want you to know, I don't regret this marriage. Not anymore. Not for a long time now. Neither do I. They sat like that as darkness fell, hands joined, facing an uncertain future together. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She lay in the bed that had once been meant for her sister, listening to Rowan's steady breathing from his place by the fire, and tried to prepare for what was coming. She'd faced humiliation before, at the wedding, walking down the aisle to laughter and judgment. But this felt different, bigger, like everything she'd built over the past weeks could be torn away by a judge's signature and a father's greed. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to gray dawn light and Rowan standing by the bed. They're here, he said quietly. Mara sat up, her heart hammering. Through the window she could see them, 5 riders emerging from the tree line. 4 men and 1 woman, all dressed too well for mountain travel. She recognized Rowan's father immediately. He had the same build as his son, the same strong features, but where Rowan was rough and weathered, his father was polished. Expensive clothes, perfect posture, the bearing of a man used to being obeyed. The woman riding beside him was young, maybe 20, beautiful in the careful way of women who'd never worked a hard day. Her riding habit was impeccable, her hair perfectly arranged despite the journey. That's the daughter? Mara asked. Must be. The other 3 men were clearly lawyers and the judge. Well-fed, comfortable men who looked extremely unhappy to be this far from civilization. Rowan opened the door and stepped out to meet them. Mara followed, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cold. Rowan. His father's voice was deep, commanding. It's been a long time. Not long enough. Rowan's tone was flat. What do you want? To save you from a terrible mistake. His father dismounted, brushing snow from his coat. This marriage is invalid. The contract specified Lydia Hale. You married her sister instead. That's grounds for annulment. The contract specified a marriage alliance. It was fulfilled. By deception. By substitution. No reasonable man would accept such terms. Then I guess I'm not a reasonable man. His father's jaw tightened. Don't be difficult, Rowan. I'm here to help you. This woman, he gestured dismissively at Mara, she's beneath you, a replacement bride, utterly unsuitable for a man of your standing. My standing? Rowan's laugh was harsh. I'm a mountain trapper. I live in a 1-room cabin and survive on venison and hard work. What standing are you talking about? The standing you were born to. The standing you threw away when you ran up here to play at Independence. His father's voice hardened. But that ends now. Judge Carlson has agreed to annul this farce of a marriage. You'll come back to Silver Creek, marry Charlotte Whitmore as planned, and take your rightful place in society. For the first time, the young woman spoke. Her voice was cultured, bored. Father, can we hurry this along? It's freezing, and this cabin is depressing. Charlotte, please. Whitmore gave her an indulgent smile. We'll be done soon. Rowan looked at Mara, and she saw the question in his eyes. The choice he was facing, his land and independence versus his father's world. Her versus this polished, perfect woman who represented everything he'd run from. Mara stepped forward. Before you make any decisions, there's something you should know. All eyes turned to her. Mara, don't, Rowan started. They need to hear this. She pulled the complaint from her pocket, the pages she'd carried out wrapped in oilcloth. I've spent the last 2 weeks documenting systematic price fixing and illegal trade practices by lowland buyers. Marcus Webb, the Silver Creek Trading Company, and several others have been coordinating to keep fur prices artificially low. They've cheated mountain families out of thousands of dollars over the past 5 years. Whitmore's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I have records, Mara continued. Testimony. Evidence that would interest the Territorial Governor's Commission very much, especially the parts about fraudulent land claims and illegal monopoly practices. You're bluffing, Rowan's father said. Am I? She held up the complaint. 23 pages of documented evidence, names, dates, prices, witness statements, all of it ready to be filed with the territorial government, unless, of course, you'd like to reconsider this annulment. One of the lawyers stepped forward. Let me see that. Mara handed it over. He read quickly, his expression growing more concerned with each page. Sir, he said to Whitmore quietly. This is detailed. If even half of it's accurate. It's all accurate, Mara said firmly. And I have 8 families ready to testify. Whitmore took the complaint, scanned it himself. His face remained calm, but his hands gripped the pages too tightly. This proves nothing, he said finally. Market fluctuations are normal. Competition is legal. Price fixing isn't. Coordinated monopolies aren't. And I have documentation showing you and your partners deliberately divided the territory to avoid competition. Mara looked at Rowan's father. I also have records showing your fur brokerage in Helena has been part of the scheme. You want to annul your son's marriage? Fine. But that complaint goes to the governor tomorrow. And I promise you, the investigation that follows will be very thorough. The silence that fell was heavy, tense. Judge Carlson cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss this inside? Somewhere warmer? No, Rowan said flatly. You're not welcome in my home. His father's face reddened. Rowan, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You came here to destroy my marriage, take my land, and drag me back to a life I don't want. And you're using the law to do it because you can't accept that I chose differently than you planned. He moved to stand beside Mara, close enough that their shoulders touched. So here's my answer. My marriage stands. My wife stays. And if you try to push this annulment, I'll make sure that complaint reaches every newspaper between here and Washington. See how that affects your business prospects. You destroy your own father? You came here to destroy me first. Charlotte Whitmore laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. Father, this is absurd. Look at them. Look at this place. Even if we forced the marriage through, he'd be miserable. Let him rot up here with his replacement bride. We'll find other land opportunities. Charlotte, Whitmore started. No, I'm not marrying some mountain hermit who clearly prefers poverty to civilization. This was a waste of time. She turned her horse, started back down the trail. After a moment, Whitmore followed, shooting one last venomous look at Mara. The lawyers and judge gathered their things, clearly eager to leave. Rowan's father remained. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. This woman, this life, it's beneath you. You still don't understand, Rowan replied. I never wanted what you wanted. Not the business, not the society, not the respectability. I wanted this. The mountain, the freedom, the choice to build my own life. With her? His father looked at Mara with open disdain. With her, Rowan confirmed. She's worth 10 of your business partners. She's smarter than your lawyers. And she sees me as I am, not as what you tried to force me to be. So yes, with her. His father stared at him for a long moment. Then he mounted his horse without another word and rode away. They stood in the clearing, watching the riders disappear into the trees, until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then Rowan turned to Mara. You saved us, he said. We saved us, together. That complaint is going to the governor anyway. Those families deserve justice, not just leverage. She looked up at him. But it worked. They're gone. For now, my father's not the type to give up permanently. Then we'll deal with it when he comes back. Together. Rowan's hand found hers, squeezed gently. Together. They went back inside, and Mara added more wood to the fire. The cabin felt different now. Not just a shelter, not just a place to survive. Something more. I should finish the complaint, she said. Get it ready to file. Not today. Rowan pulled out the bottle of terrible whiskey, poured 2 cups. Today we celebrate being free of my father and his plans. That's worth celebrating? That's worth everything. They drank, and the whiskey was still terrible, but somehow it didn't matter. Over the next few days, Mara finalized the complaint and gave it to Ruth to take to Helena. The Mountain families pooled money for the filing fees and travel costs, and Ruth rode out with 2 other families willing to testify. It would take weeks, maybe months, for anything to come of it, but at least the process had started. In the meantime, life on the mountain continued. Rowan started building the second bed he'd promised that first night, though he worked on it slowly, without urgency. Mara noticed he kept finding reasons to delay finishing it. One evening, about a week after his father's visit, she called him on it. You're never going to finish that bed, are you? He looked up from where he was sanding a plank by the fire. What makes you say that? Because you've been working on it for 6 days and you're still on the frame. At this rate, it'll be spring before it's done. Maybe I'm being thorough. Maybe you don't actually want a second bed. The words hung between them. Rowan set down the sandpaper, met her eyes. "Do you want a second bed?" he asked quietly. Mara's heart kicked up. They'd been dancing around this for weeks now. The growing closeness, the almost touches, the way they'd catch each other staring and look away. "No," she admitted. "I don't." "Then I'll stop building it." He stood, crossed the cabin to where she sat at the table, looked down at her with those storm-gray eyes that had seemed so cold that first day and now held so much warmth. "I know this isn't how either of us planned our lives," he said. "I know we started this as a transaction, a practical arrangement. But somewhere along the way, it became something more. At least for me." "For me too," Mara whispered. He reached down, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, almost reverent. "I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I need you to know you're not a replacement. You're not second choice. You're the person who made this mountain feel like home instead of just survival. You're—" He stopped, frustrated with himself. "You matter, Mara. More than I know how to say." She stood, closing the distance between them. "Then don't say it. Show me." He kissed her then, finally, his hands gentle on her face. It wasn't smooth or practiced or perfect. It was hesitant and honest and real. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "This changes things," he said. "I know. We can't go back to how it was. I don't want to go back." That night, the bed that had been made for Lydia became theirs. Not because it had to be, but because they chose it. And in the morning, when Mara woke wrapped in Rowan's arms, the mountain wind howling outside, she felt something she'd never expected to feel. Home. The days that followed were different, softer. They still worked hard, the mountain demanded that. But there was tenderness now between the practical tasks, a touch on the shoulder as they passed each other, a shared smile over morning coffee. Small gestures that built into something bigger. Ruth came back from Helena 3 weeks later with news. The Territorial Commission had accepted the complaint. An investigation was opening. It would take time, but the process had started. More importantly, word had spread. Buyers who'd been cheating mountain families for years were suddenly nervous, suddenly willing to negotiate fairer prices. The threat of investigation had shifted the balance of power. "You did this," Ruth told Mara. "You gave us leverage we never had before." "We did it together," Mara corrected. "All of us." But she felt the weight of it, the responsibility. These families were counting on her to see this through, to build a case strong enough to bring real change. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt like purpose. That evening, as she and Rowan sat by the fire, she told him about a new idea she'd been developing. "What if we formalized it?" she said. "Created an association of mountain families. Pool our resources, share information about fair buyers, coordinate our trade so we have more negotiating power." Rowan considered this. "You mean organize the whole territory?" "Just the families who want to participate. No one forced. But together, we'd be stronger than apart." "That would take work. A lot of work." "I know, but I think it's worth it." She looked at him. "What do you think?" He was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "I think my father was right about one thing." "What's that?" "You are too good for me." He pulled her closer. "But I'm keeping you anyway." Mara laughed, and the sound filled the cabin with warmth. Outside, winter deepened its grip on the mountain. But inside, by the fire, two people who'd started as strangers were building something that would last far longer than any single season. Spring came late to the high country that year, arriving in fits and starts like it wasn't sure it was welcome. Snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass and mud underneath. The creek behind the cabin swelled with runoff, rushing and noisy after months of frozen silence. And one morning in early April, Mara woke to the sound of birds. She lay there listening, Rowan's arm heavy across her waist, and tried to remember the last time she'd heard birdsong. Months. It had been months. "You awake?" Rowan's voice was rough with sleep. "The birds woke me." "Spring robins. They're early this year." He pulled her closer, and Mara settled back against his chest, content. They had maybe another hour before the day demanded their attention, before Rowan needed to check the trap lines and Mara needed to review the latest correspondence from Helena about the investigation. "We should go down to the valley soon," she said. "Check on my parents, see how the alliance is holding. You want to see them?" "Not particularly, but it needs to be done." Rowan was quiet for a moment. You've changed, since you came up here. How? You're harder, more direct, less apologetic about taking up space. Mara considered that. Is that bad? No, it's honest. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. The valley tried to make you small. Up here, you finally got room to be the size you actually are. It was maybe the most poetic thing he'd ever said to her. Mara turned in his arms, kissed him properly. I love you, she said. She'd been saying it for a few weeks now. He still wasn't great at saying it back, but he showed it in 100 small ways. Coffee already made when she woke, furs arranged just how she liked them, the way he listened when she talked about the association she was building. I know, he said, which was his version of the same thing. Then, quieter, love you too. The words still came out rough, like they hurt, but they came. 2 days later, they rode down to the valley together. The trip that had taken 3 brutal hours in November now took just over 2. The trails were clearer, the weather kinder. Mara rode Copper with confidence now, no longer terrified of the cliff edges and steep switchbacks. The Hale homestead looked smaller than she remembered. The house needed paint. The barn sagged. Sheep grazed in the far pasture, but there weren't as many as there should have been. Thomas Hale came out when he heard the horses, his face wary. When he saw Mara, relief and shame warred in his expression. Mara, you look well. I am well. She dismounted, let him embrace her briefly. He smelled like whiskey and failure. Where's Mama? Inside, she'll want to see you. Her mother was thinner, older looking. When she saw Mara, she burst into tears. I thought we heard rumors that Rowan's father tried to annul the marriage. We thought you'd come home. This is my home now, Mara said gently. The mountain, the cabin. Rowan. Her mother looked at her searchingly. Are you happy? The question surprised her. No one had asked her that. Not once, in all the weeks since the wedding. Yes, Mara said, and realized she meant it. I'm happy. Her mother's tears came harder then, but different. Relief, maybe. Or regret for all the years she'd overlooked her younger daughter. I'm glad, she whispered. I'm so glad. They sat in the cramped kitchen, drinking weak tea while Mara's parents asked careful questions about her life. Rowan stood by the door, clearly uncomfortable but present. The sheep operation, Mara said eventually. How is it? Her father's face fell. Not good. We lost 30 head over winter, disease, and the prices... He stopped, shook his head. We're barely keeping afloat. What about the water rights? From the marriage alliance? We're using them. They've helped. But it's not enough to fix everything. Mara pulled out a folded paper from her pocket. I've been working with the other mountain families. We formed an association, pooled resources, shared information about fair buyers and good prices. I thought maybe you'd want to join. Her father took the paper, read it slowly. Mara, this is comprehensive. Professional. I've learned a few things about organizing. From who? From surviving. From building something that matters. He looked up at her, and she saw him really see her for the first time in years. Not as the lesser daughter, not as the replacement, just as herself. I'd like to join, he said quietly, if you'll have me. Of course we will. That's what the association is for, helping each other do better than we could alone. They talked details for another hour. By the time Mara and Rowan left, her father looked lighter, more hopeful than she'd seen him in years. On the ride back up the mountain, Rowan said, That was kind of you, after everything they did. They're still my parents, and holding grudges takes more energy than I have. You're a better person than I am. No. I just understand that people do desperate things when they're drowning. My father was drowning. He made bad choices trying to save himself. Like offering you as a replacement bride. Like that. She glanced at him. But it worked out. Did it? I'm here, aren't I? With you. Building something real. I'd say that worked out fine. He smiled, and they rode the rest of the way in companionable silence. Back at the cabin, spring work demanded their attention. Rowan planted a small garden, the first he'd bothered with in years. Mara organized the association's first official meeting, scheduled for late May, when the trails would be fully passable. And on a warm afternoon in late April, a rider came up the mountain carrying news that changed everything. Ruth dismounted, looking grimmer than Mara had ever seen her. The investigation finished, she said without preamble. The Territorial Commission made their ruling. Mara's heart sank at Ruth's expression. What did they decide? They found evidence of price fixing, coordinated monopoly practices, fraudulent land claims, everything we documented. Ruth's face was hard. They're issuing fines, revoking some trading licenses. Marcus Webb's business is shutting down entirely. That's good news, isn't it? It is, but there's more. Ruth pulled out a letter, handed it to Mara. This came to me, but it's addressed to you. Mara unfolded it, reading quickly. It was from the Territorial Commission, thanking her for her detailed complaint, asking if she'd be willing to testify at additional hearings, and her breath caught, offering her a position. They want me to work for the commission? She looked up, stunned. As a trade compliance investigator? They were impressed, Ruth said. Said your organizational skills and attention to detail were better than half their trained lawyers. The position would be based in Helena, good salary, real influence. Mara's hands shook slightly as she reread the letter. A real job. Recognition. The chance to do this work professionally, help not just mountain families, but everyone being cheated by corrupt traders. Everything she'd wanted to matter, to make a difference, to be seen as valuable in her own right. And all she'd have to do was leave the mountain, leave the cabin, leave Rowan. When do they need an answer? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. 2 weeks. After Ruth left, Mara sat at the table, staring at the letter. Rowan came in from working in the garden, took one look at her face, and knew something had happened. What's wrong? She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it slowly, his expression going carefully blank. When he finished, he set it down gently on the table. That's a good offer, he said. Yes. Important work. Yes. You should take it. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? You should take it, he repeated, his voice flat. It's what you've been working toward. Recognition, influence. A chance to matter on a bigger scale than just this mountain. I matter here. I know you do. But this is bigger than us. Bigger than what I can offer you. Mara stood, anger rising. What you can offer me? Rowan, this is my home. You're my husband. Our life together is small, he finished. A cabin in the wilderness, hard work and isolation. That letter is offering you a real future, Mara. A career. A life beyond just surviving. I don't want a life beyond this. I want this life. With you. He turned away, looking out the window at the mountains. You say that now. But in 5 years? 10? When you're stuck up here, doing the same things day after day, watching your skills go to waste, you'll resent me. Resent this place. And his voice cracked. I can't watch that happen. So you're just going to push me away? Decide for me what I want? I'm trying to give you a choice. Real choice. Not the forced choice you had at the wedding. The wedding was 7 months ago. Everything that's happened since then, I chose that. I chose you. I chose us. How is that not real? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because I'm terrified that you chose wrong. That you settled for me because you didn't think you had better options. But now you do. And if you don't take them, if you stay here with me, I'll never know if it's because you truly want this or because you're just making the best of a bad situation. The honesty of it stopped her cold. This wasn't about pushing her away, it was about his own fear. His own inability to believe that someone like her would choose someone like him unless forced to. Mara crossed to him, took his face in her hands, made him look at her. Listen to me, she said firmly. I am not Lydia. I don't dream about theaters and dance halls and city life. I dream about this, about building something that lasts, about waking up next to someone who sees me for exactly who I am, about work that matters and a life that's real. Mara, I'm not finished. Yes, that job is tempting. Yes, it would be satisfying work. But it would mean leaving you, leaving this place, leaving everything we've built, and that's not a trade I'm willing to make. You might regret it. Maybe. People regret all kinds of choices, but I know with absolute certainty that I'd regret leaving more than I'd ever regret staying. He searched her face, looking for doubt, for hesitation. She let him look, hiding nothing. You really mean that, he said finally. Every word. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. She felt him shaking, relief, maybe, or delayed fear, or just the weight of believing that someone had chosen him freely. I love you, he he said into her hair. I'm terrible at saying it, but I do. So much it scares me. I know. You show me every day. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the afternoon light faded to evening. Later, Mara wrote her response to the Territorial Commission. She thanked them for the offer, explained that while she was honored, her work with the Mountain Families Association required her presence here, but she'd be happy to consult on future cases if they needed her expertise. It was the right choice. She knew it in her bones. But that didn't mean it was easy. The association's first official meeting happened on a clear May morning when the mountain was finally free of snow. 12 families showed up, more than Mara had dared hope. They gathered at the Timber Creek Junction, bringing their trade records and their questions and their cautious optimism. Mara had prepared carefully. She'd created a simple membership structure, fair contribution guidelines, and a system for sharing information about buyers and prices. Nothing fancy, nothing they couldn't manage themselves. The goal, she told the gathered families, is simple. We're stronger together than apart. We share information, we coordinate our trading, and we refuse to do business with anyone who tries to cheat us. We build relationships with fair buyers and cut out the ones who aren't. And if they refuse to pay fair prices, someone asked, then we don't sell to them. We wait for better buyers. We support each other through the waiting. That takes capital, resources most of us don't have, which is why we pool resources. Create an emergency fund that members can borrow from when they need to wait for better prices. No interest, just pay back when they can. The families looked at each other, considering. It could work, Ruth said, if we all commit to it, if we trust each other. Trust is the hard part, the older man, his name was Samuel, said. Mountain families aren't used to trusting. Then we start small, Mara suggested. We try it for one season, see how it goes. If it works, we continue. If it doesn't, we go back to how things were. Slowly, heads nodded. Agreement. They spent the rest of the day working out details. By the time the sun was setting, they had the framework of something real. Not perfect, but functional. A beginning. As families dispersed, heading back to their scattered homes, Ruth pulled Mara aside. I misjudged you, she said bluntly. Thought you were soft, weak, valley-bred, and useless up here. I know. I was wrong. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, and what you've built here, she gestured at the departing families. It's going to change everything for us. We built it together. You started it. Don't diminish that. Mara didn't know what to say. Praise still felt foreign, uncomfortable. Ruth smiled. You'll learn to accept it eventually. Rowan's good at that, seeing what's valuable and holding on to it. He saw it in you before the rest of us did. He saw what he needed. I just happened to fit. No, he saw what you are. Strong, smart, capable. Everything a mountain life requires. Ruth squeezed her shoulder. You've earned your place here. Remember that. Summer came in full, warm, and bright. The garden Rowan had planted flourished. The association held its second meeting, then its third. More families joined. The emergency fund grew, and slowly, the balance of power shifted. Buyers who'd been cheating for years found themselves facing organized resistance. Families who'd always sold desperately, taking whatever price was offered, now waited for fair deals. Some buyers adapted, started paying honestly. Others gave up and moved to different territories where people were easier to exploit. It wasn't a revolution, just steady pressure applied consistently. But it worked. By late July, Mara could see the difference in the families around them. People stood a little straighter, spoke with more confidence. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were beginning to thrive. And on a warm August evening, as Mara and Rowan sat outside the cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, he said something that surprised her. I want to build a bigger cabin. She looked at him. Why? Because this one's too small. Because I want a real bedroom separate from the main room. Because, he hesitated, because I'm thinking about the future, about maybe having children someday, and this cabin isn't big enough for that. Children. They'd never discussed it, never planned that far ahead. Do you want children? Mara asked carefully. I don't know. Maybe. If you do. He looked at her. Do you? She thought about it, honestly considered it for the first time. Yes, she said slowly. Not right now, but someday. Yes. Then we'll need more space. We will. I was thinking, we could build onto the existing cabin, add a bedroom on the north side, expand the main room, put in real windows, not just these small ones. Maybe even a proper stove instead of just the hearth. Mara smiled. That sounds like settling in for the long term. It is settling in for the long term. This is home now, for both of us. Might as well make it comfortable. They started planning the expansion the next day. Drew rough sketches, argued about the layout, made and remade decisions. It was good work. Future work. The kind of planning you only did when you believed you'd be somewhere long enough to see it finished. In September, a letter arrived from Lydia. Mara almost didn't open it, but curiosity won out. The letter was short. Lydia was married now to James, the tinker's son. They lived in Silver Creek, running a small shop. She was pregnant. Happy, she claimed. Though the word felt hollow coming from Lydia, who'd always claimed happiness easily and discarded it just as fast. At the end, a single line, I hope you've forgiven me. Mara read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with all the other letters she'd received over the months. Correspondence from the association, notes from the Territorial Commission, updates from Ruth. Lydia? Rowan asked, seeing her expression. She wants forgiveness. Will you give it to her? I don't know, she made choices that hurt people. But those choices also led to this. To us. To a life I wouldn't trade for anything. Mara looked at him. How do you forgive someone for inadvertently giving you everything you needed? You just do, or you don't. Either way, it's your choice. Choice. Everything in her life now came down to choice. Not fate, not obligation, not desperate necessity, just the freedom to decide what mattered and what didn't. She decided Lydia didn't matter. Not enough to hold on to anger. Not enough to waste energy on resentment. She wrote back a brief note. I'm happy too. That's enough. It was the truth. And it was freedom. The cabin expansion took most of the fall. Rowan did the heavy work, but Mara helped where she could, holding boards steady, mixing mortar, measuring and rechecking dimensions. Ruth and a few other families came up to help during the framing. It became a community project, neighbors supporting neighbors. By the time the first snow fell in late November, the addition was finished. Not perfect. The windows didn't quite line up evenly, and one corner of the new bedroom was slightly crooked, but solid, weatherproof, theirs. The new bedroom had real glass windows that let in morning light, space for a proper bed, a dresser, storage. The main room had expanded to include a real kitchen area with a cast-iron stove they'd bought from a trader passing through. The cabin felt spacious now, like a home that could hold a family, not just two people surviving. On the first anniversary of their wedding, Rowan gave Mara a gift. It was a set of shelves he'd built himself, carefully sanded and fitted together. On the top shelf, he'd carved words into the wood. For Mara, who turned a cabin into a home. She traced the letters with her fingers, feeling the care in each carved line. It's perfect, she whispered. It's crooked. I'm not good at carving. It's perfect, she insisted, because you made it, for me. That night, they lay in their new bedroom, windows open to let in the cold November air, and talked about the year that had passed. If you could go back, Rowan said, to that day in the chapel, knowing everything that would happen, would you still walk down the aisle? Mara didn't have to think about it. Yes, without hesitation, would you still say you'd take me? In a heartbeat, he pulled her closer. Best decision I ever made, even if I didn't know it at the time. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, while the first snow of the season fell softly outside. December came, and with it, Mara's first real mountain winter. Not as a newcomer struggling to understand, but as someone who belonged. She knew how to read the weather now, how to prepare for storms, how to ration supplies and make food last. The association held a winter gathering in late December, families bringing food and gathering at Ruth's larger cabin to celebrate making it through another year. There was music, someone had a fiddle, and dancing and stories. Mara watched Rowan talking with Samuel and some other men, gesturing as he explained something about trap placement. Watched how they listened, respected his expertise. He'd always been respected for his survival skills, but now he was part of something larger, connected. You did that, Ruth said, appearing beside her. Gave him a reason to be part of the community instead of just surviving on its edges. He gave me a place to belong, Mara replied. Fair trade. More than fair, I'd say. As winter deepened, Mara discovered something unexpected. She was good at this life. Not just competent, good. The work that had seemed overwhelming at first now felt natural. The isolation that should have driven her mad felt like peace. The harshness of mountain living had made her stronger, not broken her. She'd become the person she was always meant to be. Just needed the right place, the right challenge, the right partner to bring it out. In February, Ruth came up with news. The Territorial Commission had handed down final rulings in the price-fixing case. Marcus Webb was permanently barred from trading in Montana Territory. 2 other buyers were fined heavily and put under regulatory supervision, and new laws were being written to prevent future coordination between buyers. It won't solve everything, Ruth said, but it's a start, a real change. And it happened because you were stubborn enough to document everything. We were stubborn enough, Mara corrected. All of us. Take the credit, Mara. You earned it. Later, after Ruth left, Rowan found Mara standing by the window, looking out at the snow-covered mountains. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About value," she said. "All my life I thought my value came from what other people saw in me. How beautiful I was. How useful. How convenient. But that's not how value works, is it? Real value comes from what you build, what you contribute, who you choose to be. Took you long enough to figure that out." She turned to face him. "It took finding someone who saw me clearly, who didn't need me to be beautiful or charming or anything other than myself." "I'm selfish," Rowan said. "I saw what I needed and grabbed hold. Lucky for me, what I needed was you. Lucky for both of us." He crossed to her, took her hands. "I have something to tell you." "What?" "I talked to a lawyer in Silver Creek. About my father. About his claim to this land." Mara's heart skipped. "And?" "The land's fully mine. He has no legal standing to challenge it. I've been independent long enough, made my own way. Even if he wanted to fight, he'd lose." "Why tell me this now?" "Because I want you to know, this life, this place, it's secure. Not something that can be taken away on a whim. What we're building here is permanent. I never doubted that. I know. But I needed to hear it officially, needed to know for certain that no one can undo what we've made." Spring came again, right on time this year, and with it, Mara realized something that made her heart race with equal parts terror and joy. She was pregnant. She waited 3 weeks to be sure before telling Rowan. Chose a quiet evening when they were both sitting by the fire, the day's work done. "I need to tell you something," she said. He looked up from the trap he was mending. "What?" "I'm pregnant." His hands stilled. The trap fell forgotten to the floor. Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor. All the signs are there." He crossed to her in 2 long strides, pulled her up, held her tight. "A baby," he whispered into her hair. "We're having a baby. Are you happy about it?" He pulled back, looked at her like she was insane. "Happy?" "Mara, I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. But yes, I'm happy." They told the association at the next meeting, told Ruth, who cried and hugged Mara so hard her ribs hurt, told her parents in a letter that came back full of joy and cautious hope. The Mountain families rallied, brought gifts, baby clothes someone's children had outgrown, a cradle Samuel built himself, advice and support, and the kind of community care that made Mara's throat tight with emotion. Summer passed in a blur of preparation. Rowan finished the nursery, painting the walls with whitewash, and building a changing table that was only slightly uneven. Mara sewed baby clothes and tried not to panic about everything she didn't know about motherhood. And in early October, on a clear morning when the aspens had turned gold and the air smelled like coming winter, she went into labor. Ruth came. So did 2 other mountain women who'd delivered babies before. They took over the cabin with calm efficiency, boiling water and preparing cloths and telling Rowan to make himself useful somewhere else. The labor was long, painful, messy and unglamorous and harder than any work Mara had ever done. But when she finally held her daughter, small and red-faced and screaming her displeasure at being born, every moment of pain was worth it. Rowan came in, looking pale and terrified, sat beside the bed, stared at the tiny person in Mara's arms like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "A daughter," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A daughter," Mara agreed. "What should we name her?" They discussed names but never decided. Now, looking at this small person who'd changed everything, Mara knew what felt right. Hope, she said. I want to name her Hope. Rowan nodded, touching one tiny hand with his scarred, calloused finger. Hope Vance, I like it. The baby stopped crying, looked up at them with unfocused eyes, and Mara felt something shift in her chest. A new kind of love, fierce and protective and absolute. This was her family now. This was her life. Not the one she'd planned, not the one anyone expected, but the one she'd chosen. The one she'd built with her own hands and stubborn determination. And it was perfect in its imperfection, real in a way nothing in her old life had ever been real. That night, after the women had left and the baby was sleeping in her new cradle, Rowan and Mara sat together by the fire. We did it, Rowan said quietly. Built something that lasts. We're still building it, every day. True. He looked at her, and his eyes held everything he still struggled to put into words. Love, gratitude, wonder that this was his life now. Thank you. For what? For staying, for choosing this, for being exactly who you are. Mara leaned against him, watched the fire burn low, listened to their daughter's soft breathing. Thank you for seeing me, she said, for making space for me to become who I was meant to be. Outside, the mountain wind picked up, singing its endless song. But inside, there was warmth, there was family, there was a future stretching out ahead of them, uncertain but full of possibility. And Mara, the woman who'd once been invisible, who'd walked down an aisle to laughter and judgment, who'd been offered as a replacement and accepted out of desperation, she had finally found exactly where she belonged. Not because someone chose her, but because she'd chosen herself. And in the end, that was the only choice that mattered. Years later, when Hope was old enough to ask questions, she'd point to the carving on the shelves in the main room and ask what it meant. Mara would tell her the truth, about the wedding that wasn't meant for her, about the mountain that seemed impossible, about the man who saw her value when no one else did, about choosing to build instead of running, about love that grew slowly, honestly, in the space between survival and hope. Were you scared? Hope would ask. Terrified, Mara would answer honestly. But I was brave anyway. That's what matters. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. And Hope would nod, storing the lesson away for her own future challenges. Because that's what Mara had learned on this mountain, in this life she'd built from nothing. Value isn't given. It's created, claimed, earned through the daily choice to show up and do the work and be exactly who you are. Love isn't perfect. It's honest. Built in the quiet moments between grand gestures. Proven through consistency, not drama. And home isn't a place you're born to. It's a place you build. With your own hands, your own choices, your own stubborn refusal to settle for less than you deserve. The mountain had taught her that. Rowan had shown her that. And she'd teach it to Hope when the time came. But for now, on this particular evening, with the fire burning low, and her family around her and the future spreading out, uncertain but unafraid before them, Mara was simply content. She had been the bride who was never meant to walk down that aisle, but she'd become the woman who built a life worth living anyway. And that was everything.